Hello, and welcome to episode 85 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. We are here today with Dave Feldman, Director of Green America's Center for Sustainability Solutions and CEO of the Livability Project. Dave is also the co-founder of Media for Green. Dave, how are you doing today?
Good. Jordan, thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure.
Glad to have you. The first question I'd like to ask you is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done to advance the public interest, and why?
Well, my background, as you can tell from the different titles and the projects I'm working on, are all around sustainability. So my last 15 years, I've been very active in working with businesses and different communities of interest to help make them become more sustainable. And my current position right now, it's a 4-day-a-week position, is the director at Green America. They have a Center for Sustainability Solutions, and I'm working on supply chains and system change across a number of different sectors. Sustainable ag, finance, clean energy, and fair trade and labor.
Interesting. So an interest in sustainability. You were previously with Bethesda Green. Now, does sustainability always have an environmental connotation, or can it mean something else as well?
It's an interesting discussion. We could fill all your entire time about the definitions and the interpretations of sustainability. But traditionally, your purists look at sustainability as having an environment, economic, and ecology. A social side. So it's kind of the people say 3 E's, or people, planet, profit. So it really encompasses all of those different aspects. So the environment is one piece, but whether you're looking at a recycling program or you're looking at an urban transportation system, there's 3 different lenses that you would look at in making a decision around that, not just the environment in and of itself.
People, profit,
planet.
And planet.
Yeah, so you heard the expression, perhaps triple bottom line.
Triple bottom line.
That is what they refer to. So those are lenses that corporations can address all of those different areas.
And for listeners who don't know, the triple bottom line is composed of those 3 P's?
Correct.
Okay.
It's saying businesses has a role and responsibility not only for profitability, which it does, but also to address the people, whether that's their employees or the communities at large, and then environmental responsibility, both in the workplace and beyond.
Interesting. So it's your opinion that all businesses exist for multiple reasons and have responsibilities incumbent upon them, which go beyond making a profit. Is that true of every business?
You mentioned the word a few moments ago, opinion.
Yeah.
I think different businesses address triple bottom line in different ways. There's a new classification called the B Corporation, the Benefit Corporation, which actually is trying to build those principles into its core methodology. And there's a certification program. So there's a lot of businesses that are moving in that direction.
Sure.
And it's becoming more measurable. But I wouldn't say that necessarily that's the benchmark and that everyone is pursuing that particular direction. I think it's a great way to go. And I think, not to talk politics, but the political climate is real challenging right now. Corporate America has a real interesting role and an opportunity to lead the way in how we address a lot of these social and environmental issues.
So there's this trend towards having benefit corporations that not only make profits for publicly held companies' shareholders, or to make profits for privately held companies, but a benefit corporation also tries to improve the world. And you're saying there's a trend toward this, and this is affecting regular blue chip type
Correct.
companies in America?
And Green America, which is, it's not the group that I work within, but another part of the organization, we also have a green business certification. So it helps provide education, advisory services, and support for businesses that want to go through that process and become more sustainable. So then they go through a process, and it's really like a checklist. It's like a lead building as you go through and you meet a number of criteria, and if you meet enough criteria, you get certified. So it's a process.
And why would any business wish to get certified?
There's a number of reasons why. I mean, one can say it's because it's the right thing to do and is good, and a lot of businesses do that. But that's not going to be the general driver overall. Many businesses are in business to make money, and if you think about it, let's use a couple words: water conservation, energy efficiency. if you're eliminating certain usage of certain things, there's an economic benefit to that.
So it's about reducing cost.
Right.
And then it's also about maybe attracting consumers with a brand. Is it used for marketing purposes?
Not all companies do that, but there are some companies that can either market themselves. There's certain companies that their brand is based on their sustainability goals and objectives, organic foods, for example, or energy efficiency. But there's also a whole trend right now in that millennials are more socially conscious, or others as well. So they want to work for companies that tend to have that focus. So there's also an attraction and retention angle from a job standpoint, that people want to work with on a company that has a social mission and a goal.
Wow, there's even a workforce development implication to what strategic direction a company is taking when it determines to what extent they want to meet all three factors of the triple bottom line.
Correct. So there's a lot of reasons to do that. It's interesting what I'm finding in the work through the Center of Sustainability Solutions. It's very interesting. We do this supply chain work. So we're finding that there are companies out there. We do a lot with non-GMO foods, for example.
For our listeners, GMO is?
Genetically modified organisms. And it's also a stepping stone toward being organic.
And what is organic for our listeners?
Organic means a lot of different things, but essentially it's no pesticides, herbicides. It's a set of
natural
process. Yeah, I mean, natural is actually a different term.
Oh.
So each one of these words, it's actually quite complicated.
Interesting.
There's so many different distinctions, but organic is the highest level of achievement that a food product and a company want. And they have to go through a certification as well to show that they met a number of marks. So it's where the ingredients come from. It's the sterilization of the products itself. So it's no using pesticides. So it's natural. Kind of is one of those words that doesn't have a lot of meaning. So where I was going with this is, so you have these groups of organic companies. They make commitments to be organic, but then they don't necessarily know how to get there. They want to be more organic. So the challenge is you have to go through an entire supply chain. So for example, farmers.
Yeah.
A farmer is not going to necessarily switch over to all organic unless they know that they have a market for it, their products, and that they get the extra cost potentially that might be assumed from doing that.
So when you talk about a farmer in a market, taking this example, you're trying to say, I wouldn't, as a farmer, want to pursue creating the organic market unless I knew that, one, the higher price of my goods as a result of being organic would be something the market would bear, and two, that pursuing organic options might actually reduce my costs. Is that?
Yeah, I don't ever want to say that what one farmer does or one farmer doesn't do. All folks have different goals and objectives, but to scale, to scale, to get a large group of farmers, there needs to be a demand, and they need to know that they get the cost that they're looking for. And sometimes organic isn't even more over time. Again, the whole idea of scaling. Once you hit scale, and you've seen the price, for example, of organic foods come way down. Why? Because it's able to scale in a very different way right now.
Do you have a concrete example of some agricultural good that went through the process of becoming organic, and how you went through the whole supply chain for that one product to make it organic?
Yeah, I mean, we're working right now in two different areas pretty strongly. One is dairy, and we're working with a lot of the bigger brands in dairy. I guess it's on our website, so I can share, but it's Dannon, Chobani, Fage, Ben & Jerry's. I mean, these are all
big brands.
These are big. Well, they're smaller ones as well. Those are just the ones that people would know. But you can't have organic dairy unless you have the right kind of grains that the cows eat initially.
Really?
And if you think about soy and corn, which is where most of the feed comes from, 90+% of both of those grains or of those products or foods are genetically modified. So to change that,
and to be genetically modified means you're not organic.
Yeah, that's right. If you're modifying it, that's one of the class distinctions of organic. Organic is actually a higher classification than GMOs, but GMOs is a real big issue right now. So what we've been doing is working with the farmers and all the ingredient companies in between, because if the brand wants these kinds of things and willing to promote it and market it through different channels, then going back down the supply chain, everything needs to be in place in order to make that happen.
So not only
we bring them all together in a very interesting environment, we facilitate these different kind of networking discussions, And we get them at the table working together in ways that they typically wouldn't. And we often get competitors sharing information, saying, you know what, we've got to change our operations to make that happen.
So not only are you what you eat, but you are what your food eats.
That's an interesting way of looking at it, right? so a lot of what, sustainability, and this is kind of an area that I focused on. You mentioned Bethesda Green, my company Livability Project, is also about multiple stakeholder groups. So whereas supply chain brings people together along a set of processes to help businesses become more sustainable, the Livability Project helps bring community folks together to have dialogues, whether you're nonprofits or businesses or government or residents and academics, but even across different sectors, and say, how do we make our community more sustainable? So a lot of what I look at, and this isn't everyone's perspective, but you get people working together in a collaborative environment to be able to create a more sustainability, and that's kind of an underlying theme.
So has there always been a drive for sustainability? And if not, what's the cause, or what's the root cause, or some of the primary drivers that are inspiring and motivating these businesses and these individuals to pursue sustainable options? Why are consumers worried about this now? Were they worried about this 100 years ago? Why is this something that matters to people now?
It's funny, if you look 100 years ago, there really weren't many unsustainable options, because a lot of the chemicals and a lot of the practices that have grown through the Industrial Revolution didn't even exist 100 years ago. So in many ways, the sustainability movement is a response to a set of changes that have occurred throughout the last century in our agricultural system, in our energy system, in how we consume goods and how we dispose of goods. You hear of composting and recycling. Those are all responses to the amount of waste that we generate. And there are very sustainable ways of generating waste, so they are changing.
Just to make sure we're understanding the topic here, would you say a few hundred years ago, what proportion of the food that people ate anywhere a few hundred years ago was organic?
A few hundred years ago?
Yeah.
100%.
100% was organic.
Right.
So now we have a lesser percent of our food being organic.
Correct.
Because of the introduction of industrial and mechanical processes in
Correct.
food production.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, the main foods, when you look at non-GMO, for example, which again is going toward organic, but it's mostly your wheat and your soy are almost all non-organic. So,
and why is that?
That's a longer discussion.
They're more like disease resistant. They have higher yields.
You've created monocultures because you want just it's about scale. It's about.
And is that bad?
Those are a matter of opinions. There are challenges in both different kind of food systems. I would look at personally that the food system needs to be more sustainable in a lot of ways, and there's a whole range of issues going on around our protection of our soil, water management. So these are all sustainable ag issues, which are very complex. But yes, I would say that the practices that we've incorporated in our agricultural system could easily be said bad.
So I want to pivot a little bit to the topic of Dave Feldman. We've been talking about organic foods, about businesses being mission-driven in addition to being profit-driven. We've spoken about supply chain management, a lot of different kind of fields here. Let's go back to the very beginning. How is it and when was it that you first began becoming interested in sustainability as a concept? How did you even learn about it? Obviously, most teenagers walking around probably don't say, hey, I really want to make a career out of sustainability. How is, especially, maybe more so now, but especially before. So how is it that you came into this field and then, charted your course through it?
I had an interesting job career position a number of years ago, between 2002 and 2007. I worked at the British Embassy in Washington, head of their economic development team. And I spent a lot of time over in the UK. And what made economic development interesting is I got to visit a lot of places and see what their longer term visions were for their city centers, for the jobs that they were trying to create, for the products and services and solutions that they were trying to develop. And at that time, the Brits were really into sustainability. I mean, it was driven by climate change and other issues, but it was really something that struck me. And
as a population or their government?
A bit of both, actually. I mean, under the Blair administration, it was something that was government-driven, but it was also a lifestyle of many of the people within in the country. And Europeans have typically been a little bit of ahead of the sustainability movement, still very much are.
Ahead of Americans or ahead of the whole world? Or both?
Both most likely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's pockets in other areas, but certainly of America. And I started looking at what innovation looked like in entrepreneurship around sustainability, and that led me to believe that every community should have kind of like a group of people who are working on these sustainability issues, because there's so many different issues and there's little pockets in different areas. How do you bring them together, and how do you really bring it to a place that it can grow at a grassroots and a community level? And I kind of created a model where we bring government and business and these folks to work on these kinds of issues together. And I'm a business builder. I like to build businesses, and I like to keep a social value. So
Are you a businessman yourself?
I have two businesses now: Livability Project and Media for Green. I also work for a nonprofit. So
it's entrepreneurship. So you first got started with economic development, some urban planning in there, in response to climate change, understanding the implications of environmental change on business structures, and then you evolve from economic development to a sense of to an interest in sustainable models, and from there into more businesses.
Right. And from an economic development standpoint, one can make a case that there are great opportunities in sustainability. I truly believe that the next generation of technologies, of solutions, are going to be addressing real problems that we have in our society. So the companies that recognize that and can bring those products to market in a way are going to be in a strong place. And those are going to be both at a company level, but also at a country level. And I get worried sometimes that the United States isn't focused on that, and we're going to lose our competitive advantage to others who are.
Well, in a moment, I'd like to segue into your work with Bethesda Green, which was an incubator for green startup organizations. But before we get to that, I wanted to just note the curious path that you've taken. Most individuals who have been interested in business, right? They get interested in economic development, they tend to go more. Often it is interesting that the path you chose was, I'm interested in business, therefore I'm going to get into environmentally friendly procedures, which usually,
as a business.
Right, because usually you see someone who has an interest in business and they're pursuing a chamber of commerce, or you're pursuing some kind of pro-business, anti-regulatory path, because you often find they're at loggerheads with each other, and you have an interest in stakeholder engagement and coalition building. Maybe that comes into it. Can you talk for a minute about how being pro-business, which is often at odds with pro-environmental individuals, you actually segued from one to the next? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I actually host a speaking series. I've done some interviews of Scott Nash of Mom's Organic Market, Seth of Honest Tea, Marnie Abramson of the Tower. Actually, she's got Next Gen Lighting is her company right now, where I've interviewed those folks. And I see business and sustainability, there's a nexus that brings those two together. And I think that it really makes good sense. And I think sustainability is kind of it's a big word. We started here, but it's also a lens on how to look at kind of the intersection of everything and how it all works together. It says, nothing happens in isolation of everything else. Everything has a broader impact, and business is like that as well. So, your best business people aren't off there doing things by themselves. They're out there forming coalitions and they're working with other partners. And, my work has kind of helped me to understand, it's like, there's connections out there. After reading great authors in sustainability, they all see these kinds of connections, and they're trying to change the whole system. So that has been one of the drivers is, how do you shift and work with big businesses up and down their supply chain or across a range of services? So it's a systemic approach in some respects, and that's what a business incubator does.
So before we get to that, I just want to get a sense, I want to step out of the box for a moment and just get perspective here. So suppose we were a late 19th century robber baron, and we wanted our company to exist for 200 years. And we were very interested in long-term existence and growth and profitability. And then take that, and then on the other hand, we have a company in late 19th century America, and we're okay with that company going out of business 2 years from now. Now, with those two examples, would I, before the environmental movement started, in those two examples, in the first example, would I want to pursue a sustainable business growth pattern? And then I guess in the second example, in pursuing an a sustainable growth pattern, would I have less robust profits in the short term?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for every business's goals and objectives. I mean, every CEO has their own goals, and my values are really about creating a business that provides value across a whole range of these issues.
But the idea is it in the business's long-term interest to be sustainable?
I think it is nowadays. You might not have always been able to make that case.
Mm-hmm.
You look at some of the best businesses that become more successful, and sustainability wasn't really one of their objectives. In some respects, it's up to consumers. At the end of the day, you're a business and you're going to sell what people buy. So, in some ways, I can make a case that if you're a consumer and you're asking for more sustainable goods, then the businesses will have to address those needs too. So, I don't put sustainability only on the onus is only on business. People have a responsibility to be educated consumers and buy things that are healthier for themselves and the environment as well. So it's a lot of things happening simultaneously.
The market is being responsive to consumer demand,
and you're seeing that happen right now. I mean, a lot of food companies are changing because they know that they're competing at different levels, and that if you do want to be here in 200 years, you better be addressing these new tastes of folk coming now.
So let's get back to your incubator. So you said that you think that being a green company is where the economy is going in the near future. What did you do with Bethesda Greens to help create those sort of companies?
So Bethesda Green is an example of, I would call, like a sustainability hub, local sustainability hub. There's actually other ones right now. There's a group in Silver Spring Green and Green Wheaton. Mm-hmm. There's groups all over the DC area and others that are there kind of as a conduit, as a kind of a facilitator, a convener of a lot of these activities. Bethesda Green became an education center, a business incubator, and a place where the community gathered to address the community-related issues. I like to call it a new community center. And it was driven by business. We had a very cool facility on top of a bank, and it was actually redesigned to be a green space, so it was walking its walk. And the goal was to bring people together to address these issues and to build a robust, vibrant business community, but also including the residents and the citizens so that they're part of the dialogue. They, at the end of the day, are consumers, but they're also people who live a certain life and want a certain quality of life within their own communities. Sounds
like building communities and coalitions is also important for creating a sustainable model.
Yeah, I mean, not all businesses want to be in the community development business per se, but when you look at it at a bigger level, certainly your economic development, your governments want to focus on getting a robust business environment, through chambers and through other groups. But then you also want to have an educated and engaged citizenry as well. So yes, they're all there. It doesn't mean every business is focusing on every aspect at the same time.
So is there anything that's rather unique about the Washington metropolitan area that you've decided to go from suburban Maryland, suburban Virginia, Washington, D.C., where you decided to focus a lot of your environmental efforts in this area?
Well, one is I live here, and I'm well connected, so that's it. There's some unique opportunities and unique challenges in this area. One of the biggest challenges is that you have a number of different municipalities that don't always work well together. You've got two states, Maryland and Virginia, and you've got D.C., and they all have their own governments, whereas a city like Chicago has one region that can have one plan that's carried out across them. Metro is a perfect example how sometimes things don't always go smoothly when you have a lot of folks working together.
And for our listeners who may not be from the D.C. area, Dave referred to the subway train system, Metro, which we call Metro,
but D.C. also has a very educated population. There's a lot of affluence here. I mean, it is a ripe area. I mean, the D.C. metropolitan area has a very large population right now, and a willingness to invest in whether it's green buildings. I think, if I'm not mistaken, D.C. and Montgomery County is the highest concentration of green buildings in the country. I don't know if that's per capita. Bike trails. These are kind of things that add to a quality of life. So this region has been moving in that direction. Some can say it could move faster and deeper, but different than it was 15 years ago. So, change sometimes moves slowly.
So, speaking of moving faster, we are nearing the end of our podcast. And I'd like to ask you to reflect upon your varied career throughout business and sustainability, being an entrepreneur in the film industry, working with a nonprofit, working in environmental sustainability. And I'd like to ask you to reflect, why do you do it? What do you enjoy about it? What do you hope to leave behind? What is the end goal of all of your efforts? What would you hope to have accomplished at the end of your career through all of your effort?
Yeah, that's a good question. One is I want to be, I'm always looking for work that's meaningful and purposeful. So on a day-to-day basis, I want to do something that I know is providing benefits to people and communities. What do I want to leave behind? Just the idea that I'm making a difference, and that can be in many different ways. I mean, through my work at Bethesda Green, I've had people come up to me and say, I made a career change, or I went off in a different direction because of the inspiration that you provided. I'm working in supply chains right now. We're about to change some pretty significant directions that major businesses are working with. Now, I'm not doing it in isolation. I'm part of a much larger team, but those are the kinds of changes that have long-lasting impact. I'm excited about some of the film projects I'm working on because now there's something tangible that's left behind as an education tool. So, I want to be able to look back and say, wow, I really, I wasn't afraid as an entrepreneur to jump and put it all out there, but also leave behind, a positive influence. It's, the world's getting more and more complicated, and change is happening whether we want it or not. It's what kind of change are we leaving behind? And if I can help influence that with a set of principles that makes the world better, then by all means.
So that has been Dave Feldman, Director of Green America's Center for Sustainability Solutions, CEO of the Livability Project, and co-founder of Media for Green. Dave speaks about his commitment to improving the world as one where he seeks to leave a concrete contribution that is sustainable over time. He would like to see concrete examples of making the world a better place as it gets more complicated, making sure that we not only do not advance profit at the expense of environmental sustainability, at the expense of having a satisfied workforce, but understanding that we can actually have a pro-business and a pro-environment philosophy that is married together as we move forward. So, Dave, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jordan. Really appreciate it.
And this has been episode 85 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.